Has anyone known a killer before they killed? What were they like? Boy, a couple years my minor in high school. He was always the outcast in his classes. He dressed funny, talked funny, and said disturbing things that some recall as threats, mostly to the girls of the school. After graduation, he ended up butchering a homeless woman he was, I can't say living together or in a relationship with. I'm not sure what their status was. Either way, kitchen knife. Drained her into the tub. In court he showed no remorse and was proud to have finally ended someone's life. His father was my professor in university. He took it very hard. One of my parents' friends used to come around all the time. He was probably only 21. Nicest guy ever. Type of guy who wouldn't hurt a fly. A couple of years later he moved and we seen him on the news for murder. Turned out he got on the ice and his girlfriend convinced him to kill her ex with her. They then buried him in concrete. Only reason they got caught was because they wrote their ducking names in the concrete. Yes, was hired at the same time as him. W walked right next to him for several years. He was one of those stoner guys always bragging about the parties he went to. He was a little obnoxious in a bro sort of way, so I always skipped hanging out with him after work. After I left that job a little while later he killed his ex-girlfriend while her 5-year-old was in the apt watching TV. Took the kid on a road trip to Texas and smothered her on Christmas morning and left her in a suitcase on the side of the road. I graduated high school with Dr. Death, Chris Dunge. He was an asshole. He was charming with teachers and people who could benefit him. He was awful to everybody else. I didn't see it, but one or more awkward and vulnerable classmates said he bullied him relentlessly, and I believe it. He was easily irritated and if you got on his nerves he would really lose his cool. Remarkably mean. And people would just shrug their shoulders and say that's just how Chris is. My little sister dated a guy when she was in high school who ended up murdering a couple he owed money to for heroin. This dude beat them with a ducking baseball bat and hammer. He almost got the death sentence, but ended up with life in prison with no possibility of parole. He was a seemingly nice, polite teenager. I used to drive him and my sister around for various dates and things. He was quiet, but not oddly so. He just seemed like a normal teenage boy. Edit. Sorry, I just got some clarification on some details. The murder weapons were actually a microphone stand and a hammer. He is eligible for parole after 51 years. This happened in 2015. A few years ago I hired a father-son handyman team to help me get my house ready to put on the market. Among other things, my outside doorknobs were in bad shape so they installed new ones. The dad seemed pretty nice. Even did a little bit for free on their third and last day at my house. He was pretty fired up about a big job they were starting the next day. 3 days later he killed his new clients because they were unhappy with his work. A neighbor saw what happened and ran into her house and hid. He kicked her door in and shot her too. I was terrified until he was caught. I knew this guy before, like literally the night before the crime. He was at my house talking about a new job he thought he'd gotten. How he was going to be able to take better care of his daughter. A new tattoo he was going to get. Just random stuff. Some backstory. He had a brain tumor when he was I think 9 or 10. Not sure what kind or where, but he was a make-a-wish kid. I think he went to Disney or something. But they did manage to get it out with surgery. So he was a little, well, he wasn't stupid or disabled, but I'd say slow. Basically, he was a little it through his teen years. Big pants, loud music, fast car, yo I'm gangster, kind of thing. But when he met his girlfriend and then especially when his daughter was born, he seemed to change a lot for the better. He was the younger brother of a friend of mine. I went from you can't not bring Eddie to my house and I don't even want him to know where we live, to sure, Eddie and you can come for dinner. So yeah, lots of change. The night it happened we played Dan that evening and he was as boringly normal as he ever was. Actually he'd never expressed any anger or anything toward the girlfriend's mother, at all. He'd said how happy he was that she was letting them live there and helping with the baby. After, we only saw him once more, in court, when he was sentenced. We went with his mom, who we knew, and at the end, he turned his face and wouldn't even nod at us. I just don't get it. I don't think I ever will. I went to high school with a girl who poisoned her father. No one knew until she confessed a year later watching a Shakespeare play in college. She was a little weird in school, but I didn't think she was capable of that. She confessed to my cousin BTW. Sheesh. He was really nice and I had gone to K-12 with him. Never knew him to be the kind of person that would even get upset. Then I get a text a couple years ago asking, do you know about X? Him and his brother killed their parents. Edit. I'm out of the loop on this one. Younger brother was cleared. He was an asshole. I'm not surprised he killed somebody. He killed a 65-year-old man in a revenge drive-by shooting. He shoot at the wrong house. The guy he intended to kill didn't even live in that neighborhood. I worked with a guy that murdered his GF. He was a cool dude. I sat with him a lot on my lunch breaks. We talked about football, school, life etc. Pretty normal stuff. Never would think he was a killer. He was not an aggressive person at all. I spent 3 months on a study abroad with the Special Forces, ex-FBI, guy named Sir Joe. We were a small group of mostly students, whereas Joe was older and there as part of foreign immersion training for the military. He was a little awkward at times and didn't share too much about himself, which we mostly attributed to the age difference. I'd describe Joe as very intense but kind-hearted. The military was very important to him and he always seemed very focused on that. But occasionally he'd make a dry joke or let his guard down for a moment with the group. He was very into photography and shared lots of great photos from the trip. He was also somewhat the protector of the group and we always felt completely safe with him. One story I'll share was when he was walking over a bridge and spied some guys in the trees waiting to jump down and rob him. He pulled out a large knife he carried on him and casually brandished it as he walked by. The guys smartly decided not to mess with Joe, but after he crossed he saw them sprint across the bridge and hide behind a building. 2 policemen showed up shortly after and Joe showed them where the guys were hiding so the police could arrest them. Anyways, a few years after we got back I heard the news that he had killed someone and took his own life. He had been training for a new position and his commander deemed that he wasn't physically fit enough for the job. The judgment effectively ended his career and he felt he had been unfairly judged. He brought a gun into the base and shot his commander dead, then killed himself. I dated a guy who later stabbed his mother to death. He was psychotic and abusive. And I fled the state because I was afraid he was going to kill me. I found out years later that he murdered his mother just a few months after I left him. He's still in prison. It's been 20 years and I still have nightmares about him and I still feel a little sick talking about it. My sister was killed by her fiance. He was, well, normal. Took good care of her during recovery from surgery. A bit weird, but nothing stands out. Weird as in opposite interests and shy, where my sister was outgoing. Never would have expected it from him. Until I had to clean out their place and found a bunch of guns and crap load of knives and it. One of my best friends when I was stationed at Fort Bragg ended up getting into some sort of drunken altercation later on in his career at Fort Hood. Went back to his house to retrieve a pistol. Went back to the party and shot a dude. It was absolutely insane to me when I heard about it because he had never shown any tendencies towards violence when I hung out with him pretty much every day for over 2 years. Probably drank a little too much. But he was always just a good dude raising a good family. Last time I talked to him was 3 days before his trial. He ended up changing his plea to guilty to receive 25 years instead of life. He's at Leavenworth now. Going on probably 7 or 8 years now. Feel bad for the family of the guy he shot. He was a medically retired vet and didn't deserve to be gunned down like that. As much as the murderer was my friend. He gets to go home one day. The guy he shot never will. I was friends with a guy who was accused of physical abusing his son. He went through the courts to fight it. The ex-girlfriend finally admitted she made it up because he cheated on her. He ended up killing her then himself. I played basketball with a guy a few years ago in high school. Tried to find him on Facebook and turns out he was being tried for murder. Apparently he and some of his friends were looking for pot money, so they broke into this guy's house and somehow the guy ended up dead. Everyone in his group said he pulled the trigger but he denied it. Maybe he did it, maybe he didn't, but I can say that he was a genuinely nice person when I knew him. Never would have expected him to kill someone, but I guess my mom was right about hanging out with the wrong crowd. Kid was in my dad's Weeblo troop and hung out with my brother. Really arrogant and mouthy. Biggest thing he did in junior high was when he was in 7th grade. He dismantled the toilets in one of our school's upstairs bathrooms. A couple of years later, his mom passed, and he found her, started to get in trouble, theft, then fighting. A few years later, he raped a girl, went to jail. After he was released, he wound up killing 7 people. My neighbor's father murdered his entire family and then killed himself shortly before he was to be indicted over a Ponzi-esque scheme. I knew the whole family well. The dad was always a little weird and would do things like wear a full 3-piece suit to a child's soccer game. Never showed any signs of being violent though. The mother and 2 daughters were wonderful people. It was a real tragedy. He was seemingly a really nice dude. He worked in our college dining hall. Always friendly, polite, kind to the students, and he made me smile or chuckle more than once. It turns out he stabbed a homeless woman over 24 times and was arrested for murder. I suppose some people can just snap or are really good at hiding true nature. Not sure which category he falls into. Our roommate killed a 16-year-old over some money he thought he stole. I have to testify in court soon actually. Edit. Here's the article if anyone wants to read it. My best friend's older brother killed her stepmom, strangled her and burned the house down. He was just like any other teenage older brother, a bit rebellious but nothing out of the ordinary. He was kinda goth and liked heavy metal and had dark humor. He played GoldenEye with us and always let me use the see-through purple controller. He teased his little sister just like any brother would. One time he took us for a car ride and did donuts in a church parking lot while blasting a Big Shiny Tunes album. And it was really fun. Nothing ever indicated what he would do later in life. I used to live in a shared house with 3 other dudes. This one particular guy used to go to work every day, come home, go to the club for a few beers. I left the house. Several years later a young lass was stabbed to death not far from where I was working. Police came in the next day and asked if anyone recognized the photo. Lo and behold, it was a dude I used to live with. My old neighbor's stepson. He was an overindulged rich boy type. He stabbed his mom, dad, and brother, then locked their dog in a crate and burned the house to the ground. I know it sounds bad, but the dog thing always bothered me most of all. One of my childhood friends had a creepy little brother. She told me he killed some kittens in their driveway with a basketball, and that one night he woke her up by standing over her bed with a lighter, watching her. He was only like 6 or 7 years old. Couple years later I find out from her that he's been institutionalized until he's 18. She told me she was really worried for herself and her parents the day he gets out, which now that I think about it, may have happened already or it's coming soon. Edit. As for how I remember him, he wasn't like my little brothers, as in he didn't get excited about games or toys and he never smiled. My manager at work was a pretty chill, nerdy guy. He was really nice to talk to and a fun boss. Then he smothered his infant son and it kind of messed me up for a while. This was a guy that I almost considered a friend. Everyone at work was shocked and didn't know how to handle or feel about it. Of course, we talked about it when there weren't any customers around, but most of it was the expected I can't believe, manager, did this talk. I was school friends in high school with a guy who ended up murdering his ex-GF and had 2 friends on the side of a highway. One survived. He drove them off the road and executed them before committing suicide. The guy was an active member in the Mormon church. He went to the activities, dances, camping trips, seminary, scouts, etc. But he was always a little bit rebellious. He was aggressive and very much tried to be the alpha. He was a very good football player and was very athletic. If he was your partner in gym class he would hit you, not full power, if you ever made a mistake. He used to talk about chasing cats down in his truck if he saw them on the road and would laugh about it later. He also was an avid hunter and enjoyed killing things, which isn't that uncommon in Alberta since everyone had a family member who lived on a farm and shot gophers pests at some point. We all thought that he was just aggressive because of hormones. Dude was jacked and had the voice of a 30-year-old at 17, but we never expected him to turn out the way he did. P.S. I never really met his parents so I don't know if he had issues at home. but his sisters were a year or two older than me and they are lovely people. They were always kind and caring and would go out of their way to make sure nobody was left out. High school classmate murdered a college student at random and was given the death penalty, executed in Florida. He had a difficult home life but was always the life of the party. I went spelunking with a girl who shot people at Penn State. We worked at the diner together. Her husband was the maitre d' and she was the cashier. I was a server. He was nice. She was nice. She was apparently booted from the army for not taking her meds. Then she worked at the diner. Seemed fine. Then stopped taking her meds. I never would have thought or expected it. They were both a bit weird, but we all were. About a month or so after our spelunking trip, she went to Old Main Lawn, hid in some bushes, and just started sniping people. Some guy stopped her and got stabbed trying to do so. Never would have thought her capable of that. RIP to the people she killed. Sorry for the people she injured. Weird time. Haven't thought of that in a while. Edit. Link. Update 2. Before I get yelled at for false reporting, she was booted from the reserves for not graduating high school, and she got stabbed by herself. Not the guy who stopped her. Sorry, it's been a long time. Update 3. If I recall correctly, the cave system was called J4, which is now closed. TL. Doctor at the end. Never knew this guy personally, but in my hometown there were 4 kids in particular. 2 of them being the victim, believe it or not. We'll call them Eric and Matt, who I did know personally, and then the only survivor of the attack, Howard, the killer, who we'll call Jake, was celebrating his friend Matt's 21st birthday with Eric and Howard. Everything seemed okay at first, but as the night went on Jake seemed quiet and sort of detached, which is about the time Matt and Howard went to go chat with him and check on him. Soon after, Eric noticed he was getting a bit fidgety and walked over as well. As he walked over, Jake had pulled a knife and stabbed Matt in the throat. Howard, having seen this, immediately turned to run while Eric tried to stop Jake. Jake was then able to stab him several times until he died. Howard was able to get away with severe injuries but luckily lived to tell the tale. Jake turned himself in not too long afterwards. Everyone who knew him wasn't surprised that he did it. I guess he always seemed a bit wacko. TL. DR. Local kid is celebrating 21st day and stabs 2 friends to death and hospitalizing 3rd friend with seemingly no motive in sight. Edit. It was not Jake's birthday as I previously stated. It was Matt's. Yes, a kid that was in my English class killed his girlfriend. He seemed like a normal friendly guy. It's not my personal story, but it's my dad's. He used to be a special ed teacher assistant and he met all kinds of kids when he first started teaching. Well, one occasion he used to always talk about one kid in his class that was extremely antisocial and never said a word during class. Screwed up part A, this kid in special ed with kids that have disabilities when this certain students didn't have any. My dad ended up getting to know this kid. He was very shy and said short sentences. My dad realized he was very intelligent and reached out to him about high placement. Principal declined the request and the kid went back into his shell. One day on the news all I see is a murder at the high school my dad worked at, and turned out the kid went to school with a loaded gun on a mission to kill the principal. Cops swarmed the school and SWAT came in to detain the student. SWAT ended up putting 17 bullets into the kid. Later my dad found his notebook and turns out the kid had a dream to being a teacher like my father and help others with depression and neglect. A girl that lived with us for a while had a boyfriend that would stop by and visit the go out. He loved his meth. According to her, they moved in together. He beat a man to death with a baseball bat over some drugs. She helped him hide the body. He testified that she knew nothing about it so that she could stay out of jail to raise the kids. My childhood neighbor and Sunday school teacher, children's church classes, recently murdered his wife in cold blood. He is like 70 years old. He always gave me the creeps and I could never figure out why. Once when my brother was around 15, he was over at their house with our mom helping this man's wife do some renovations on their house. The guy showed up and went off on my brother as if he were trying to get with his wife, when my bro was forced to be there by our mom to help this elder lady. Odd. Fast forward to now. My dad works at the jail he's at. My parents were divorced so my dad never knew him before. An elderly lady recently visited the killer in jail and had a health emergency while she was in the visiting cubicles. And my dad called the ambulance to help her or whatever. Later on, this guy shakes my dad's hand and looks right into his eyes with a seemingly genuine "thank you for saving this lady." My dad said he felt a chill run through his entire body and compared the guy's smile to the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. Creepy. I knew a guy whose best friend beat someone to death. He got woken up by a phone call from his mate telling him about it and thought IJT was a sick joke. A few days later he got arrested as an accessory to murder and spent 6 years in jail. All because of a phone call. Poor guy had a real hard time trying to accept his mate's actions and the outcome for himself. I grew up with a kid who shot and killed a gas station clerk execution style while robbing the gas station while high on sherm. He was a ducking D when we were in elementary school, middle school, junior high, and high school, so I was not even remotely surprised that he grew up to be a murderer. He sent me a Facebook request from prison a few years ago. I didn't know her well, but I attended a wedding with a member of the bridal party some years back. The maid of honor seemed like a cheery, funny person. I had a good time at the wedding and we chatted a bit. About 6 months later the mob shot and killed her husband. I don't know if I ever found out why. I made coffee for Bob minutes after I met him. Seemed like an okay person, young and carefree. Quite looking forward to an evening of beer and BBQ steak with his dad. He and a friend, Frank, were on their way to Bob's dad's house to celebrate the dad's birthday, followed by fishing the next day. Late in the evening Frank decided he'd had enough beer and went to sleep. A couple of hours later Bob shook him awake saying, "I done it. I killed him. I done him with the axe." Sure enough, Bob had embedded an axe in his dad's head. Frank wanted to go but Bob was still hyper and a bit manic, so he had to wait until Bob finally dozed off near dawn. Then he walked 10 km to town and told the cops what had happened. Frank was arrested on the spot for being an accessory to murder because he hadn't immediately leapt into Bob's car without the keys and tried to drive away. The cops found Bob still sleeping and his dad still dead. Bob went to jail, but I forgot how long for. It was a long time ago and he's probably out now. The cops dropped the charges against Frank. My ex-boyfriend's best friend in school ended up breaking into his girlfriend's house with another guy and beat her to death. I remember hanging out with him in 2 classes that my ex didn't have with us. He was really funny and a smartass. He got me in trouble a lot for laughing during class. He was also good at drawing and coming up with raps. When I read the article about him years later I was kind of shocked. Guess people just change. When I was 10 had a friend from the next block over who had an older brother of 16 or 17. One night his brother had a fight with his mom over a bad report card from school. It escalated to him chasing his mom out of the house and shooting her with a rifle. I had met both his mom and his older brother, but in that way that 10-year-olds meet parents' much older brothers, just passing through on our way to play or go ride bikes. His brother just seemed a brooding teenager that, in retrospect, smoked a lot of pot and had anger issues. Really didn't want to have anything to do with us cause we were lame. For some reason I think Sid from Toy Story with a cowboy hat. No, I did not hear the shot or the ensuing police stuff even though it happened maybe 50 yards away from my house. Brother ran. They caught him quickly. House went for sale the next week. Never saw my friend again. Never found out his verdict sentence. I was 10. My aunt was a surgical technician who worked closely with Michael Swengo, the killer doctor at Ohio State's hospital. She said he had very poor bedside manner and didn't seem even slightly concerned when his patients were in pain. He would often bring in food for the other staff and people would mysteriously get sick after. He eventually got exposed after the roommate of one of his patient's victims heard him inject a lethal dose of medication into her IV and told the woman, "When it gets your other arm, you will be dead." By the time he was found out, he had already fled the state. My aunt and several of her co-workers were interviewed by what they were told was the state medical board, but it was actually the OSU board of directors. There was a large cover-up from the university to protect their university and Swengo was allowed to kill over 100 more patients before he was caught. There's a really good book about Swengo and the cover-up called Blind Eye. My aunt was interviewed for the book and said it is the most accurate description of the killings and the politics that allowed him to keep killing.